Inside Kern County Superior Court, silence hung heavy as death itself. Armando Cruz sat motionless at the defense table, his eyes fixed downward, refusing to meet the gaze of the grieving family behind him. The court clerk's voice cut through the stillness, reading charges that made seasoned reporters flinch. First-degree murder with special circumstances. Kidnapping, rape, aggravated sexual assault. Outside, purple ribbons fluttered in Bakersfield's summer heat, symbols of a community's collective grief for Patricia Patty Alatorre, a 13-year-old girl whose laughter had been silenced forever. This wasn't just another criminal case. This was a mirror held up to modern society, reflecting a chilling truth. Behind every smartphone screen, behind every friendly message, danger could be waiting. The question wasn't just what happened to Patricia. It was how many other children were one click away from the same fate. Before we dive into this story, tell us where you're watching from, and ask yourself, in a world where predators hide behind screens and emojis, how do we protect the next generation before innocence becomes another statistic? The morning sun had barely touched the Kern County Superior Court building when reporters began lining up outside Department 3. July 7, 2020, 6 days after Patricia Alatorre vanished from her Bakersfield home. 6 days that felt like 6 lifetimes to her mother, Claire Alvarez, who clutched a purple ribbon in her trembling hands. District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer stood before the assembled press, her face etched with the kind of resolve that comes from prosecuting the unthinkable. Today, she announced, we have filed 12 felony charges against Armando Cruz in connection with the death of 13-year-old Patricia Jocelyn Alatorre. The charging document told a story that would haunt Bakersfield for years. First-degree murder with special circumstances, kidnapping, rape by force, oral copulation with a minor, aggravated sexual assault, possession of child pornography, more than 600 images, including 10 or more depicting children under 12. Each count read aloud felt like a hammer blow to the families gathered in the gallery. Clara Alvarez wept quietly, supported by her daughter Viviana, whose face betrayed a grief beyond her years. The atmosphere crackled with tension, anger, and a collective demand for justice that transcended the courtroom walls. Cruz sat expressionless between his appointed attorneys, a 24-year-old man whose ordinary appearance belied the calculated predator prosecutors would reveal him to be. Born on February 29, 1996, a leap year baby, Cruz had grown up in Ventura, graduated high school, and worked security jobs that paid him roughly $1,000 monthly. To neighbors in Inglewood, he seemed unremarkable, but his cell phone, seized during arrest, painted a different picture. Thousands upon thousands of images depicting the exploitation of children, a digital archive of depravity that investigators described as one of the worst they'd encountered. Outside the courthouse, a different scene unfolded. Community members had transformed the corner near Weibel Road and Hosking Avenue, where Patricia was last seen, into a memorial. Candles flickered beside teddy bears and handwritten notes. "Justice for Patty," one sign read. "Protect our children," declared another. The vigil had grown organically. Neighbors who'd never met Patricia, but felt her loss as if she were their own daughter, their own sister, their own friend. Bakersfield, a city of nearly 400,000, suddenly felt like a small town, united in mourning. The case had begun as a missing person report on the morning of July 2nd. Clara Alvarez discovered her daughter gone, the bed stuffed with pillows and clothing arranged to create the illusion Patricia was sleeping beneath the cover. The mother's initial assumption that her daughter had snuck out to meet friends gave way to mounting dread as hours passed without contact. By afternoon, Bakersfield Police Department had classified Patricia as a runaway, but something didn't sit right with investigators. 13-year-olds don't typically plan elaborate deceptions unless something compels them. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera. The timestamp read 11:58 p.m., July 1st, 2020. In grainy night vision footage, a young girl appeared on screen, stepping out of a house and approaching the curb. Her voice, captured by the camera's audio, sent chills through investigators. "Answer your Snapchat. Am I leaving?" Then she climbed into a white pickup truck idling at the corner of Weibel Road and Hosking Avenue. The vehicle's headlights illuminated her face for just a moment before darkness swallowed both girl and truck. Detective teams worked around the clock, analyzing every frame of footage, measuring the truck's dimensions, estimating its make and model. The white pickup became the investigation's focal point, a phantom vehicle that held the key to Patricia's whereabouts. On July 4th, as Bakersfield residents celebrated Independence Day with fireworks and barbecues, police released the surveillance image to local media. "Have you seen this truck?" the bulletin asked. Anyone with information, please contact BPD immediately. Tips flooded in. White pickups were everywhere in California. Ford F-150s, Chevy Silverados, Dodge Ram. But investigators had additional evidence that narrowed their search. On July 4th, Clara Alvarez had been examining Patricia's social media accounts, desperately seeking clues about her daughter's state of mind. What she found on Instagram made her blood run cold. Explicit messages between Patricia and an unknown user. The conversations revealed a pattern. An older male convincing a young girl to send intimate photographs, promising money, attention, affection. Classic grooming tactics, authorities would later explain, wielded with predatory precision. Digital forensics experts traced the Instagram account through IP addresses and metadata. The trail led to Inglewood, a city roughly 100 miles south of Bakersfield, nestled within Los Angeles County. Cross-referencing the social media evidence with registered white pickup trucks in the Inglewood area, investigators identified a person of interest, Armando Cruz, resident of an apartment complex near Aviation Boulevard. On July 5th, Los Angeles Police Department detained Cruz for questioning. The interrogation room at LAPD became the setting for a confession that would form the backbone of the prosecution's case. Initially, Cruz denied everything. He'd never heard of Patricia Alatorre, never been to Bakersfield, didn't own any social media accounts under the username in question. But as detectives presented evidence, the Instagram messages, the surveillance footage showing his truck, cell phone tower data, placing him in Bakersfield on July 1st, Cruz's story began to crack. Then came the admission. Yes, he'd been in contact with Patricia online. Yes, they'd exchanged explicit photographs. Yes, he'd driven to Bakersfield to meet her twice. The first encounter had occurred days before her disappearance, a meeting where Cruz convinced the 13-year-old to perform oral sex in his truck. He knew her age. She'd told him. He didn't care. The second meeting on the night of July 4th was supposed to be similar, but this time Patricia resisted. According to Cruz's statement, portions of which would later be redacted in court documents due to their graphic nature, Patricia entered his truck willingly at first, but quickly realized something was wrong. As he drove away from her neighborhood, she began screaming, demanding he take her home. Cruz drove erratically through Bakersfield streets, one hand on the wheel, the other restraining the struggling teenager. He told detectives he'd lost control, that things went too far. The euphemisms masked brutal reality. Cruz raped Patricia in the back of his truck while she fought and screamed. To silence her, he strangled her. His hands closed around her 13-year-old throat and squeezed until she stopped moving, stopped breathing, stopped being. Death, however, didn't end Cruz's depravity. According to his confession, he engaged in sexual acts with Patricia's body multiple times, fully aware she was deceased. Then, after sleeping in his truck, he drove around Inglewood, stopping at a liquor store to purchase lighter fluid. The surveillance footage from that store, time-stamped early morning July 2nd, showed Cruz carrying a bottle to the register, his expression blank. Cruz directed investigators to the disposal site, a construction area near Aviation Boulevard and West 118th Street in Inglewood. He described wrapping Patricia's body in a red sleeping bag, placing it behind a large construction vehicle, dousing it with lighter fluid, and setting it ablaze. As flame consumed evidence of his crimes, Cruz fled, but not before throwing Patricia's cell phone into bushes along Highway 99 near the Herring Road interchange during his return journey from Bakersfield. Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputies had responded to reports of a fire on July the 3rd, discovering burned remains wrapped in what appeared to be a sleeping bag. At the time, the victim's identity was unknown, but Cruz's confession connected the dots. The unidentified female found in Inglewood was Patricia Alatorre. Forensic teams worked to confirm through dental records and other means, giving Clara Alvarez the news every parent dreads. Your child is dead. July 6th marked Cruz's formal arrest. Transported back to Kern County, he was booked into jail on charges that would grow more numerous as investigators uncovered the full scope of his crimes. The search of his cell phone revealed not just communication with Patricia, but thousands of pornographic images featuring minors, a collection suggesting Patricia wasn't an isolated victim, but part of a pattern. Prosecutors would later note that while only Patricia was named as a victim in the charges, the breadth of evidence pointed to a predator who'd been operating in digital shadows for some time. The Bakersfield community responded with vigils that drew hundreds. Candles illuminated the corner where Patricia was last seen, their flames dancing in California's warm night air. Residents who'd never met the Alatorre family embraced Claire and Viviana as sisters in grief. Local artists approached Patricia's family with an idea: create a mural downtown, transforming a blank wall into a memorial that would ensure Bakersfield's daughter was never forgotten. The family agreed, grateful for a community that refused to let Patricia become just another statistic. Greenfield Union School District, where Patricia had been a student, offered grief counseling services. Teachers remembered her as bright, creative, someone whose smile could lift an entire classroom's mood. Friends described her love of cars, her quick wit, her loyalty. She was somebody, Clara Alvarez would later write in a victim impact statement. She was my baby, sister, aunt, and friend. She was a sweet child. The past tense stung every time. On July 7, 2020, Armando Cruz made his first court appearance. Dressed in jail-issued clothing, he stood before Judge Charles R. Bramer as the charges were read aloud. 12 felony counts, special circumstances that made him eligible for the death penalty. The packed courtroom fell silent during the recitation, each charge heavier than the last. When asked how he pleaded, Cruz's attorney entered a plea on his behalf: not guilty to all charges. The not guilty plea shocked many in attendance. Cruz had confessed after all. His own words described the abduction, rape, murder, and desecration of a child's body. But the American justice system provides even those who confess with the right to a trial, the right to challenge evidence, the right to mount a defense. Deputy public defenders would eventually be appointed. Chief Assistant Public Defender Tanya Richard and Deputy Public Defender Thomas Pope, tasked with the unenviable job of representing a man whose actions repulsed the entire region. The prosecution team, assembled by District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer, was formidable. Deputy District Attorney Christine Antonios, known for her meticulous case preparation and courtroom presence, would lead. Deputy District Attorney Tyson McCoy, whose careful parsing of evidence had secured convictions in other high-profile cases, would assist. Together, they faced a challenge: how to present evidence so horrific that jurors might struggle to process it while maintaining the professional decorum necessary for a fair trial. As summer turned to fall in 2020, the case entered a phase marked by motions, hearings, and legal maneuvering. But looming over everything was an invisible adversary: the COVID-19 pandemic. Courtrooms operated under modified protocols, mask required, capacity limited, some proceedings conducted remotely. The pandemic's disruption of normal court operations would delay justice for Patricia, adding to her family's frustration and grief. On August 14, 2020, Cruz's defense attorneys filed a motion that ignited controversy. They sought to exclude media and the public from all pretrial hearings. The argument centered on Cruz's right to a fair trial, claiming that extensive media coverage had created a prejudicial environment. Additionally, they cited the pandemic as justification for limiting courtroom occupancy. The motion painted Cruz as someone whose constitutional rights were being threatened by public scrutiny. The First Amendment Coalition disagreed vehemently. On September 28th, Executive Director David Snyder filed an opposition, arguing that, absent extraordinary circumstances not present in the Cruz case, the public has the right to see how their judicial system works. Open courts are a cornerstone of American democracy, Snyder argued, ensuring transparency and accountability. Closing proceedings sets a dangerous precedent, potentially allowing misconduct to flourish in darkness. Judge Bramer faced a delicate balance, protecting the defendant's right to fair proceedings while upholding the public's right to observe justice being administered. Throughout October, hearings were postponed as the court grappled with these competing interests. The coalition's motion for public trials gained traction, and ultimately proceedings remained open, though with pandemic-related capacity restrictions. By December 2020, another complication arose: continuances. The case kept being pushed back, December to February, February to later dates, as pandemic disruptions compounded normal pretrial complexities. Each delay felt like a fresh wound to the Alatorre family, who attended every hearing, who sat in the gallery silently witnessing the grinding machinery of justice. Clara Alvarez's face, photographed by media covering the proceedings, became an icon of maternal grief. Eyes red from crying, jaw set with determination, hands clutching her daughter's photograph. In February 2021, Cruz did not appear in court while his attorneys attempted to change the trial's venue. The motion argued that pervasive media coverage and community outrage made it impossible to seat an impartial jury in Kern County. Defense attorneys pointed to the vigils, the mural being planned, the widespread use of Bakersfield's daughter as Patricia's epithet. How could 12 residents render fair judgment when the entire county had already convicted Cruz in the court of public opinion? Prosecutors countered that pretrial publicity, while extensive, hadn't reached levels requiring venue change. Moreover, jury selection processes include mechanisms for identifying and excluding biased jurors. Judge Bramer sided with the prosecution, denying the venue motion. Cruz would face trial in the community where Patricia had lived and died. The community, meanwhile, continued memorializing Patricia through action. July 25, 2020, nearly a month after her death, saw a memorial service attended by hundreds. Purple ribbons became ubiquitous, worn by residents as silent declarations of solidarity. On May 15, 2021, what would have been Patricia's 14th birthday, community members gathered for a vigil celebrating her life rather than mourning her death. They shared stories, released balloons, and recommitted to ensuring her legacy included meaningful change. That change took tangible form through online safety campaigns. Schools incorporated digital literacy programs teaching children to recognize grooming behavior. Parents attended workshops on monitoring social media without invading privacy. Law enforcement partnered with advocacy groups to educate families about warning signs, secretive device usage, relationships with unknown older individuals, sudden acquisition of gifts or money. Patricia's death, tragic as it was, became a catalyst for awareness that might save others. On May 27, 2021, the Greenfield Union School District posthumously awarded Patricia a graduation diploma she would never physically receive. The ceremony, held at her gravesite with family present, represented both honor and heartbreak. Viviana Alatorre, Patricia's sister, later described the moment. "We celebrated her 8th grade graduation at a cemetery. That's not how it was supposed to be. That's not how any of this was supposed to be." As 2021 progressed, the case experienced another significant development: counsel change. On December 14, 2021, Cruz's original defense attorneys withdrew from the case. Court documents didn't specify reason, but such withdrawals typically occurred due to conflicts, resource constraints, or strategic disagreement. Chief Assistant Public Defender Tanya Richard and Deputy Public Defender Thomas Pope assumed representation, inheriting a case with mountains of evidence and a client whose confession left little room for traditional defense strategies. On January 25, 2022, yet another postponement pushed proceedings to March. On February 24, Cruz was arraigned on a new indictment. Prosecutors had refined the charges, ensuring every legal element was airtight. March hearings continued to June. Each delay tested the Alatorre family's endurance, their patience worn thin by a system that moved glacially, while their grief remained fresh and sharp. June 15, 2022, brought news that felt like progress. Cruz was ordered to stand trial on October 17, 2022. After more than 2 years of motions, postponements, and legal wrangling, the case would finally proceed to trial. Media outlets reported the date prominently, noting this would be Kern County's most closely watched trial in years. Jury selection would begin in early October, with opening statements expected later that month. The prosecution team prepared meticulously. Christine Antonios and Tyson McCoy spent months organizing evidence, surveillance footage, Instagram message logs, forensic reports, Cruz's confession, cell phone data. They consulted with digital forensics experts who would explain to jurors how grooming operates in online spaces. They coordinated with law enforcement officers who'd participate in the investigation. Every exhibit was cataloged, every witness prepped. Defense attorneys faced a nearly impossible task. Cruz had confessed. Physical evidence corroborated that confession. Witnesses could place him at relevant locations during relevant time. The defense's strategy, insofar as they had one, seemed to focus on challenging evidence admissibility, scrutinizing investigative procedures, and perhaps arguing mitigating factors during sentencing phase. Assuming conviction, which seemed inevitable, community anticipation built throughout summer 2022. Local news ran series exploring the case's broader implications for child safety. National media expressed interest, recognizing Patricia's story as emblematic of dangers facing children in the digital age. True crime podcasts requested interviews with investigators. Documentary producers approached the Alatorre family, who declined, wanting privacy amid their ongoing grief. On October 12, 2020, the 2-year anniversary of the planned trial date, a day of kindness was held in Patricia's honor. Community members performed acts of service, donated to child advocacy organizations, and participated in educational seminars about online predators. The mural unveiled that same day, painted by local artists from the Next Steps group, depicted Patricia's face radiating warmth and innocence. Above her image, the words Bakersfield's daughter stood as both memorial and promise. This community would not forget. October 3, 2022, the eve of trial, found Bakersfield holding its collective breath. Reporters prepared coverage plans. The Alatorre family steeled themselves for testimonies that would reopen barely healed wounds. Prosecutors conducted final witness prep. Defense attorneys made last-minute motions. Judge John D. Oglesby, who would preside over the trial, reviewed procedures for what promised to be an emotionally charged proceeding. Then, on October 4, 2022, everything changed. The courtroom filled early. Every seat occupied, overflow crowds gathering outside. But instead of jury selection beginning, attorneys approached the bench for a sidebar. Whispers rippled through the gallery. Something was happening, something unexpected. When the conference concluded, Chief Assistant Public Defender Tanya Richard addressed the court. Your Honor, Mr. Cruz wishes to enter a plea of guilty to all charges and enhancements. Gasps echoed through the room. Clara Alvarez collapsed into her seat, overcome. Viviana clutched her mother, tears streaming. For nearly an hour, Deputy District Attorney Tyson McCoy methodically read each of the 11 charges. The indictment had been refined from the original 12. Cruz, barely audible, admitted guilt to first-degree murder, rape, sex acts with a minor, sexual assault with a minor, possession of child pornography, and multiple enhancements that increase sentencing severity. Deputy District Attorney Christine Antonios explained the plea agreement to the court and assembled media. The District Attorney's Office had agreed to waive pursuit of the death penalty in exchange for Cruz pleading guilty to all charges with a stipulated sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Antonios acknowledged the decision involved consultation with the Alatorre family, who supported avoiding a trial that would force them to relive Patricia's final moments in excruciating detail. This was an unbelievably horrific crime, Antonios told reporters after the hearing. It is unimaginable what he did in this case, but pragmatic considerations influenced the plea deal. California's death penalty moratorium, instituted by Governor Gavin Newsom in 2019, meant no executions would occur regardless of sentence. A death penalty trial would be lengthy, expensive, and emotionally devastating for witnesses, especially family members who'd have to testify about Patricia's life and their loss. The guaranteed sentence of life without parole ensured Cruz would die in prison while sparing the family additional trauma. The guilty plea transformed the November 1st hearing from a trial's opening day into a sentencing proceeding. That morning, Kern County Superior Court Department 3 once again filled to capacity. Judge Oglesby, a veteran jurist known for thoughtful sentencing, would determine Cruz's fate within the parameters of the plea agreement. Before sentencing, the court heard victim impact statements. Viviana Alatorre spoke first, her voice steady despite visible emotion. She described the closed casket funeral necessitated by what Cruz did to Patricia's body. She explained how her sister's murder changed her soul, leaving her afraid to leave home, perpetually anxious that violence might claim her too. Having a sibling murdered changed me deeply, she said, addressing Cruz directly for the first and only time. It changes your soul. A victim advocate read Clara Alvarez's letter, the mother too overcome to speak herself. Alvarez described Patricia's light, how her daughter's smile could brighten the darkest day, how her creativity and kindness touched everyone she encountered. She wrote about living in perpetual pain, about wondering what Patricia would look like now, about missing milestones that would never occur. He violently raped her and threw her body as if she was nothing, the letter stated. She was somebody. She was my baby, sister, aunt, and friend. She was a sweet child. Throughout the reading, Alvarez sobbed uncontrollably, supported by family members who shared her anguish. Clara's letter referred to Cruz repeatedly as a monster, not a man, not even a criminal, but something inhuman, something whose cruelty exceeded comprehension. This child murderer is a cruel and ugly, sick-minded person who should never see the light of day ever again, the letter concluded. The sentiment resonated throughout the courtroom, where observers nodded in agreement. Cruz sat motionless during impact statements, head down, offering no visible reaction. Some interpreted this as remorse. Others saw it as cowardice, an inability to face the devastation he'd wrought. A probation report filed before sentencing revealed Cruz had refused to say he accepted responsibility for his actions, adding another layer of callousness to an already heinous case. Judge Oglesby, after hearing from the family and reviewing materials, pronounced sentence. The courtroom fell silent as he formally ordered life imprisonment without possibility of parole. The sentence carried finality. Cruz, now 26 years old, would remain incarcerated until his death. No appeals on sentencing were anticipated given the plea agreement. Justice, in its legal sense, had been achieved. Outside the courthouse, reactions unfolded across a spectrum of emotion. Clara Alvarez, surrounded by more than a dozen family members, leaned against the building's exterior wall and wept. No sentence could restore Patricia. No punishment fit the magnitude of loss. But knowing Cruz would never walk free provided some measure of closure. Community members who'd attended the hearing approached the family, offering hugs, condolences, and promises to keep Patricia's memory alive. January Bottoms, a family friend, stood at the corner of Truxton and Chester Avenues holding a sign, "Pedophiles deserve death." She voiced frustration shared by many that California's death penalty moratorium prevented what she viewed as appropriate punishment for Cruz's crimes. The justice system needs to be stronger, Bottoms told reporters, but she also acknowledged the reality. The Alatorre family had endured enough. Forcing them through a prolonged trial would have been cruel, and the guaranteed life sentence ensured Cruz's permanent removal from society. Deputy District Attorney Tyson McCoy addressed media following sentencing, careful not to divulge graphic details out of respect for the family. He confirmed Cruz used grooming tactics common among online predators, building trust through attention and flattery, gradually normalizing inappropriate conversations, exploiting vulnerabilities, then leveraging shame and fear to maintain control. The reality is that the internet is a dangerous place, McCoy stated plainly. These tactics are not uncommon. Parents need to be aware, vigilant, and proactive in protecting their children. Christine Antonios echoed McCoy's sentiments, noting that while Patricia was the only named victim in this case, evidence suggested Cruz's predatory behavior extended beyond this single crime. The 600-plus images of child pornography on his phone weren't all related to Patricia. He'd been operating in digital shadows for an unknown duration, potentially victimizing others who never came forward. The investigation into Cruz's digital footprint continued even after sentencing, though additional charges seemed unlikely given the life sentence already imposed. The Alatorre family's journey didn't end with sentencing. They transformed grief into action, participating in online safety initiatives and advocating for stronger protections for children in digital spaces. Clara Alvarez became a vocal supporter of legislation requiring social media platforms to implement more robust age verification and monitoring systems. She attended school board meetings urging mandatory digital literacy education that teaches children how to recognize and report grooming behavior. On October 12, 2020, the mural depicting Patricia had been unveiled between 19th and L Streets in downtown Bakersfield. The artwork, created by the Next Steps Artist Collective, showed Patricia's face surrounded by symbols representing her passion: cars, art, family. The phrase "Bakersfield's daughter" arched above her portrait, a designation embraced by the community as acknowledgement that Patricia belonged to everyone, that her loss was collective. The mural became a pilgrimage site. On Patricia's birthday, family and community members gathered there to celebrate her life. On the anniversary of her death, vigils were held at both the mural and the corner where she was last seen. Car enthusiasts, honoring Patricia's love of automobiles, organized cruises through Bakersfield, with proceeds benefiting grief counseling services and child advocacy organizations. July 10 and 11 saw hundreds participate in these memorial cruises, transforming sorrow into community solidarity. Schools throughout Kern County incorporated Patricia's Protocol, an educational framework teaching students about online danger. The curriculum, developed in consultation with law enforcement and child psychologists, covered topics including recognizing grooming, understanding consent, protecting personal information, and reporting suspicious interactions. Students learned that predators often don't fit stereotypes. They're not strangers in vans, but charismatic figures hiding behind screens, exploiting the same technologies teens use to connect with friends. Parents received parallel education. Workshops addressed uncomfortable realities. Their children were likely more tech-savvy than them, making traditional supervision insufficient. Parents learned about apps with hidden messaging features, about the difference between monitoring and invading privacy, about creating environments where children felt safe, reporting troubling interactions without fear of punishment for being online. Law enforcement agencies updated training protocols for investigating cases involving digital evidence. The Patricia Alatorre case demonstrated the critical importance of quickly securing surveillance footage, tracing IP addresses, and analyzing social media metadata. Detective units expanded partnerships with tech companies, establishing streamlined processes for obtaining data during time-sensitive investigations. Every hour mattered when a child went missing. Bureaucratic delays could mean the difference between rescue and tragedy. The case also prompted discussions about platform accountability. Critics argued that social media companies profited from connecting users while doing insufficient work to prevent predators from exploiting those connections. Instagram, where Cruz initially contacted Patricia, faced particular scrutiny. While the platform had policies prohibiting adults from soliciting minors, enforcement relied heavily on user reports, a reactive rather than proactive approach. Advocates pushed for algorithmic monitoring that could flag suspicious patterns. Adults with no prior connections messaging multiple minors. Conversations escalating from innocent to explicit. Requests for meetups or money transfers. Privacy concerns complicated these proposals. Who watches the watchers? How much surveillance is acceptable in pursuit of safety? These questions lacked easy answers, but Patricia's case made clear that status quo wasn't acceptable. Some progress emerged. Following public pressure and legislative threats, major platforms enhanced their child safety feature. Age verification improved, though determined users could still lie. Algorithms began flagging potentially dangerous conversations for human review. Reporting mechanisms became more accessible and responsive, but technology evolves constantly, and predators adapt quickly. The fight for digital child safety is never truly won, only continually waged. The Alatorre family found bittersweet comfort in Patricia's legacy, evolving beyond tragedy. She became a symbol of necessary vigilance, a reminder that children's safety requires constant effort from parents, educators, law enforcement, policymakers, and communities. Every child protected through lessons learned from Patricia's death honored her memory more than any memorial possibly could. Clara Alvarez often visited Patricia's grave, bringing flowers and speaking to her daughter as if she might hear. Sometimes Alvarez wondered aloud what Patricia would look like now. Would she still wear her hair long? What music would she love? What career might she pursue? These unanswerable questions haunted her, ghosts of futures that would never materialize. But Alvarez also found purpose in ensuring other parents wouldn't face the same nightmare, that other children wouldn't become statistics. Viviana Alatorre struggled with survivorship in her own ways. She'd lost not just a sister, but a best friend, a confidant, someone who understood her completely. Therapy helped Viviana process trauma that manifested as hypervigilance and anxiety. Simple activities, leaving home, meeting new people, using social media, became fraught with fear. But gradually, Viviana reclaimed her life, determined not to let Cruz's actions define her existence. She began speaking publicly about her experience, hoping her story might resonate with other siblings of crime victims, offering solidarity to those navigating grief's isolating landscape. The broader Alatorre family, aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, each processed loss differently. Some found solace in faith, believing Patricia was in a better place, free from suffering. Others struggled with anger that wouldn't abate, fury at Cruz, at the justice system's pace, at a world where such evil could exist. Family gatherings became bittersweet. Joy at being together tempered by the permanent absence at the table, the empty chair that screamed louder than any words. Bakersfield itself underwent subtle transformation. The city had always been tight-knit, but Patricia's case strengthened communal bonds. Neighbors watched out for each other's children more vigilantly. Community organizations formed block watch programs specifically focused on child safety. Parks and public spaces saw increased adult presence as parents recognized that supervision, while sometimes inconvenient, was non-negotiable. Local businesses contributed to Patricia's legacy in tangible ways. Restaurants donated portions of proceeds to the Patricia Alatorre Memorial Fund, which provided resources for families seeking grief counseling and funded educational programs in schools. Car dealerships, honoring Patricia's automotive passion, sponsored the annual memorial cruises. Tech companies based in Bakersfield partnered with schools to provide free internet safety workshops, their engineers explaining to students how apps worked and where vulnerabilities existed. The mural between 19th and L Streets became more than art. It evolved into a living monument. Community members regularly left fresh flowers, handwritten notes, and small tokens at its base. Some notes came from other families who'd lost children to violence, expressing solidarity across tragedy. Others came from teenagers who'd recognized grooming attempts after learning Patricia's story and wanted to thank her for the awareness that saved them. The mural's location, just blocks from Kern County Superior Court, ensured that anyone entering the justice system passed Patricia's watchful gaze, a reminder of why their work mattered. Media coverage of the case gradually shifted from sensational headline to thoughtful analysis. Investigative journalists produced long-form pieces examining broader patterns. How many children were victimized online annually? What psychological factors made certain youth vulnerable to grooming, which communities lacked resources for prevention and intervention? Patricia's name appeared in these articles not as a tragedy to exploit, but as a catalyst for necessary conversation. National organizations dedicated to child safety reference the Alatorre case in training materials. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children incorporated Patricia's story into presentations for law enforcement, highlighting investigative techniques that led to Cruz's quick apprehension. The FBI's Crimes Against Children unit studied the case as an example of effective coordination between local and federal agencies during investigations with digital components. Academic researchers published papers analyzing the grooming tactics Cruz employed, providing psychological profiles that could help identify similar predators. These studies, while clinical in language, honored Patricia by ensuring her experience contributed to knowledge that might protect others. University students studying criminology, psychology, and social work learned about the Alatorre case, carrying that knowledge into careers where they'd work to prevent similar tragedies. The legal community also learned from the case's procedural journey. The tension between Cruz's right to fair proceedings and the public's right to observe justice being administered prompted scholarly articles about courtroom transparency in the digital age. The First Amendment Coalition's successful opposition to closed hearings became precedent cited in subsequent cases, establishing that pandemic concerns alone weren't sufficient grounds for excluding public observation. Defense attorneys across California studied how Tanya Richard and Thomas Pope navigated representing a client whose guilt seemed certain and whose crimes repulsed everyone. The ethical obligations of defense counsel to provide zealous representation regardless of personal feelings were tested and ultimately upheld. While some criticized the defenders for representing Cruz, legal experts recognized that a justice system only functions when even the most despised defendants receive competent counsel. Richard and Pope's work, though thankless, ensured Cruz's conviction and sentence couldn't be challenged on grounds of inadequate representation. Prosecutors examined how Christine Antonios and Tyson McCoy balanced securing justice with protecting the Alatorre family from additional trauma. The decision to accept a guilty plea, rather than pursue death penalty at trial, demonstrated prosecutorial discretion at its most compassionate. While some victims' families demanded maximum punishment regardless of emotional cost, Antonios and McCoy recognized that justice isn't always about the harshest possible sentence. Sometimes it's about achieving certainty while minimizing further harm. Judge John D. Oglesby's handling of the sentencing hearing became a model for judicial conduct in emotionally charged cases. His demeanor, respectful toward the family, firm with Cruz, procedurally meticulous, demonstrated how courts can validate victims' experiences while maintaining the dignity essential to justice. Oglesby allowed family members to express pain and anger without letting emotion override legal principles. His sentencing remarks acknowledged both the crime's enormity and the legal framework within which he operated. As years passed, the immediate visceral horror of Patricia's murder gave way to deeper reflection about society's relationship with technology. The case occurred during 2020, a year when pandemic lockdowns forced unprecedented reliance on digital communication. Children who might have spent summers outdoors instead spent hours online, their screen time exploding as schools closed and social distancing became mandatory. This environment created ideal hunting grounds for predators who exploited isolation and boredom to build inappropriate relationships with vulnerable youth. Parents who'd previously viewed social media as relatively benign may be problematic for issues like cyberbullying or screen addiction, but not life-threatening, underwent paradigm shift. Patricia's case shattered complacency, proving that online interactions could culminate in real-world violence. The notion that danger only existed in physical spaces crumbled. Screens weren't protective barriers, but portals through which predators reached directly into homes and bedrooms. This awakening led to behavioral changes in families throughout not just Bakersfield, but communities nationwide that followed the case. Parents established rules. Devices stayed in common areas after certain hours. Privacy settings were maximized. Friend requests from strangers were declined. Suspicious messages were immediately reported. Some families implemented monitoring software, while others relied on open communication and trust. No single approach worked universally, but the common thread was intentionality, recognizing that digital spaces required active parenting just like physical ones. Schools adapted curriculum to address students' lived reality. Digital citizenship classes, once focused primarily on plagiarism and cyberbullying, expanded to cover comprehensive online safety. Teachers facilitated difficult conversations about consent, coercion, and recognizing when adult attention crosses from appropriate to predatory. Students participated in role-playing exercise, practicing how to respond to uncomfortable messages or requests. These lessons sometimes made adults squirm. Acknowledging children's sexuality and vulnerability felt dangerous, but Patricia's case proved that ignorance was more dangerous than awkward conversations. Youth themselves became advocates. Teenagers who'd personally experienced grooming attempts came forward to share stories, breaking silence that shame had imposed. They described how predators initially seemed kind, understanding, different from dismissive peers or distracted parents. They explained how conversations escalated gradually, innocent compliments becoming flirtations, flirtations becoming explicit, explicit becoming coercive. They revealed tactics. Predators isolated victims from support systems, normalized inappropriate behavior, leveraged embarrassment to ensure secrecy, threatened exposure of compromising photos to maintain control. These peer-to-peer warnings resonated in ways adult lectures couldn't. When fellow students described firsthand how they'd been manipulated, listeners recognized patterns they might have otherwise missed in their own online interaction. Youth-led social media campaigns using hashtags like Justice for Patty and Protect Our Kids reached millions, spreading awareness through the same platforms predators exploited. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, using social media to combat social media's danger, but the approach proved effective. Technology companies, facing mounting pressure, implemented changes beyond cosmetic adjustments. Meta, Facebook, Instagram's parent company, enhanced AI systems flagging suspicious direct messages between adults and minors. Snapchat improved reporting mechanisms and partnered with law enforcement to expedite data requests during investigations. TikTok implemented stricter age verification and restricted adults' ability to message users identified as minors. These changes came slowly and remained imperfect, but represented progress nonetheless. Legislative efforts gained momentum. California lawmakers introduced bills requiring social media platforms to conduct regular audits assessing child safety features' effectiveness. Other proposed legislation mandated platforms report suspected child exploitation to authorities within specific time frames. Federal lawmakers debated national standards, recognizing that state-by-state approaches created patchwork protections easily circumvented. These policy discussions cited Patricia Alator's case repeatedly, her name becoming shorthand for why action couldn't wait. Civil litigation also emerged. Though the Alator family didn't pursue lawsuits against social media companies, choosing to focus on healing rather than protracted legal battles, other families in similar situations did. These cases allege platforms failed to implement reasonable safeguards, prioritizing profit over protection. Courts grappled with Section 230 immunity, which shields platforms from liability for user-generated content. The legal landscape remained complex, but Patricia's case contributed to evolving jurisprudence around platform responsibility. Mental health professionals treating families affected by similar crimes found Patricia's case valuable for its comprehensive public documentation. Unlike many child victimization cases where details remain sealed, the Alatorre proceedings were largely public, providing insight into investigation processes, legal procedures, and family impact. Therapists use this case study when helping clients understand what to expect from criminal justice involvement, demystifying procedures that often felt intimidating or confusing. Support groups for families of murdered children welcomed the Alatorres into a community nobody wanted to join. Organizations like Parents of Murdered Children provided spaces where Claire and Viviana could share grief with others who truly understood. These groups offered practical advice: how to handle anniversaries, how to respond to insensitive comments, how to find meaning amid meaninglessness that only those who'd walked similar paths could provide. The Alatorres eventually became mentors for newly bereaved families, transforming their pain into service. The criminal justice system's treatment of child victims also evolved partly because of cases like Patricia's. Victim advocates received enhanced training on trauma-informed approaches, recognizing that navigating legal proceedings while grieving required specialized support. Court proceedings became more accommodating, allowing victim impact statements, providing separate waiting areas so families didn't encounter defendants, offering therapy dogs for emotional support during testimony. These changes, while incremental, signaled growing understanding that justice should serve victims' needs alongside societal interests. Armando Cruz, meanwhile, began serving his life sentence at a California correctional facility. Prison records indicate he was classified for general population placement, though his crimes typically marked inmates as targets for violence from other prisoners. Whether Cruz faced retribution from fellow inmates remains unknown. Prison officials don't publicly discuss such matters. What's certain is that Cruz will spend every remaining day behind bars, decades stretching ahead with no hope of release, no possibility of redemption sufficient to undo his actions. Some advocates for restorative justice questioned whether life imprisonment without parole serves any purpose beyond vengeance. They argued that even heinous offenders can change, that denying any possibility of rehabilitation abandons core principles of human dignity. But the Alatorre family and broader community felt differently. Cruz didn't just murder Patricia. He violated her body post-mortem, destroyed evidence, showed no genuine remorse, and possessed material depicting exploitation of countless other children. His sentence reflected society's judgment that some acts place perpetrators beyond redemption's reach. The debate around Cruz's sentence touched broader criminal justice reform discussions. California, which elected progressive prosecutors committed to reducing incarceration, simultaneously maintained tough stances on violent crime against children. This tension between recognizing mass incarceration's failures and protecting society's most vulnerable had no easy resolution. Patricia's case illustrated why nuance matters. Not all crimes are equal. Not all offenders deserve identical treatment. And justice sometimes requires acknowledging that mercy for perpetrators can feel like betrayal of victims. As the third anniversary of Patricia's death approached in July 2023, the Alatorre family reflected on how far they'd traveled through grief's landscape. The acute agony of early loss had evolved into chronic ache, still painful, but no longer incapacitating. Clara Alvarez had returned to work, finding routine helpful even when focus remained difficult. Viviana had graduated high school, another milestone Patricia never reached, and tentatively planned for college, though anxiety about leaving her mother alone sometimes overwhelmed her. The family continued marking important dates. Patricia's birthday remained particularly difficult, a celebration transformed into mourning. July 1st, the abduction anniversary, was spent at the memorial mural, community members joining the family in silent vigil. November 1st, Cruz's sentencing date, brought mixed emotions. Gratitude for justice achieved, frustration that no sentence could restore what was lost. Throughout these observances, one question haunted everyone involved. Could Patricia's death have been prevented if parents had monitored her social media more closely? If Instagram had better safeguards? If schools taught online safety earlier? If friends had noticed warning signs? Would she still be alive? These what-ifs tortured those who loved Patricia, each person searching their own actions for missed opportunities to intervene. Experts cautioned against such thinking. Predators like Cruz were skilled manipulators who exploited normal adolescent desires for independence and connection. Patricia wasn't reckless or foolish. She was 13, navigating a digital landscape that even adults struggled to comprehend. Blaming her or her family for failing to anticipate Cruz's evil merely compounded tragedy with undeserved guilt. The truth, uncomfortable as it was, required acknowledging that some tragedies resist prevention. Society can implement safeguards, educate youth, prosecute predators, and still, sometimes, evil finds victims. This reality didn't justify complacency, but rather demanded sustained vigilance. Patricia's death wasn't inevitable, but preventing future deaths required recognizing that safety is ongoing work, not a problem solved once and forgotten. Deputy District Attorney Tyson McCoy, reflecting years after the case, emphasized this point. "We can't guarantee that every child will be safe," he acknowledged, "but we can make it harder for predators to operate. We can teach children how to protect themselves. We can create environments where victims feel safe reporting abuse. We can hold offenders accountable swiftly and surely." These measures, implemented comprehensively, saved lives, even if individual successes remained invisible. Children who didn't become victims rarely made news. The Bakersfield Police Department incorporated the Alatorre case into training for new detectives. The investigation's success, crews identified, arrested, and charged within days, resulted from excellent police work that could be replicated. Trainees learned about quickly securing surveillance footage before it was overwritten, about leveraging digital forensics experts early in investigations, about coordinating effectively with agencies in other jurisdictions. Patricia's case, tragic as it was, provided a roadmap for rescuing future victims before tragedy struck. The mural between 19th and L Streets aged gracefully, its colors fading slightly under California's sun, but its message remaining clear. Local artists periodically touched up the artwork, ensuring Patricia's portrait stayed vibrant. The area around the mural became an unofficial gathering space where community members congregated during vigils, protests, celebrations, a public square christened by shared grief and consecrated through collective commitment to protecting children. Visitors from outside Bakersfield sometimes sought out the mural, having read about Patricia's case and wanting to pay respects. They left flowers, stuffed animals, handwritten notes expressing solidarity. The messages came from parents, siblings, survivors of violence, people who'd recognized grooming attempts after learning Patricia's story. Each tribute reinforced that Patricia's impact extended beyond Bakersfield, beyond California, resonating nationally with anyone who understood childhood's vulnerability. Clara Alvarez occasionally encountered these visitors at the mural. Conversations emerged organically, strangers bound by shared commitment to child safety, to honoring victims, to insisting that brief lives could have lasting meaning. These interactions provided Clara unexpected comfort, evidence that Patricia's death catalyzed awareness that might protect countless children she'd never met. It didn't balance the ledger. Nothing could, but it transformed senseless tragedy into purposeful legacy. As 2025 approached, Patricia would have been 18, graduating high school, contemplating college or career, navigating young adulthood's freedoms and responsibilities. Instead, she remained forever 13 in memory and photographs frozen at an age where childhood and adolescence intersect. The family imagined alternate timelines where Patricia thrived, but such fantasies brought more pain than comfort. Reality was Patricia's grave, the mural, the empty chair, the lifetime of milestones she'd never experienced. Yet even in this reality, meaning emerged. Online safety programs Patricia's death inspired had reached millions of students. Legislation strengthening platform accountability bore her name and spirit, if not letter. Families throughout America had difficult conversations about digital danger because the Alatorre case made clear that such conversations were necessary. These ripples spreading from one tragedy constituted Patricia's legacy, not the life she lived, which was too brief, but the lives protected through lessons her death taught. The question posed at this story's beginning, how do we protect the next generation when predators hide behind screens, has no simple answer. Technology evolves constantly, creating new opportunities for both connection and exploitation. Predators adapt their tactics as quickly as safeguards emerge. Perfect protection remains impossible in a free society, where isolation from all risk would require isolation from all opportunity. But Patricia's story offers guidance. Protection begins with awareness, teaching children that online interactions carry real-world consequences, that predators exploit trust and secrecy, that any adult requesting inappropriate content or meetings is dangerous regardless of how kind they seem. Protection continues through communication, creating family environments where children feel safe reporting uncomfortable situations without fear of punishment or judgment. Protection extends to platform, demanding that companies profiting from connecting users accept responsibility for minimizing exploitation. Protection involves communities, neighbors watching out for all children, not just their own. Most importantly, Protection requires acknowledging that children's safety is everyone's responsibility. Parents, educators, law enforcement, legislators, tech companies, community members all play roles in creating environments where youth can explore, learn, and connect while remaining protected from predatory adults. Patricia Alator's death demonstrated the cost of failing in this collective responsibility. Her legacy challenges society to do better. The Alator family, scarred but not broken, continued their journey through grief toward some distant, uncertain healing. They would never get over Patricia's death. Such language insults the magnitude of parental loss, but they learned to carry grief alongside life's other demands. Clara found purpose in advocacy, speaking at schools and community events about online safety. Viviana pursued psychology, hoping to help other trauma survivors navigate recovery. Together, they ensured Patricia remained more than a cautionary tale, more than a victim, more than a statistic. On quiet days when media attention faded and community vigils ended, Clara sometimes visited Patricia's grave alone. She spoke to her daughter, updating her on family news, apologizing for being unable to protect her, promising that her death wouldn't be meaningless. Whether Patricia heard these conversations mattered less than Clara's need to speak them. In a world that had taken her child, these graveside talks represented resistance against forgetting, against moving on too quickly, against letting tragedy fade into comfortable distance. Bakersfield itself bore permanent marks from July 2020. The corner where Patricia was last seen would always carry that significance. The courthouse where Cruz was sentenced remained the building where justice was partially achieved, laws executed, accountability enforced, but nothing truly restored. The mural between 19th and L Street stood as geographical reminder that innocence remains vulnerable, that evil operates among us, that vigilance can never be temporary. Years would pass. New cases would capture headlines. The intensity of community focus on the Alator case would inevitably fade as time created distance from immediate trauma. But those who loved Patricia, who investigated her murder, who prosecuted her killer, who memorialized her legacy, they would never forget. More importantly, the children protected through awareness Patricia's death created would carry forward, even if they never knew her name, even if they couldn't trace their safety back to her tragedy. This is how meaning emerges from senselessness, not through grand gestures or perfect solution, but through incremental changes in awareness, behavior, and commitment. Patricia Alator couldn't be saved, but every child who recognizes grooming attempts, every parent who maintains open communication about online dangers, every platform that implements better safeguards, every prosecutor who secures justice swiftly, all these honor her memory more profoundly than any memorial possibly could. The final question isn't whether we can eliminate danger entirely. We cannot. The final question is whether Patricia's death will catalyze sustained commitment to protecting children in digital spaces, or whether attention will fade until the next tragedy forces renewed focus. The answer depends on choices made daily by parents, educators, policymakers, companies, and communities. Patricia Alator's legacy remains unfinished, its ultimate impact determined by whether society treats her death as an isolated horror or as a call to perpetual action. In Kern County Superior Court, where Armando Cruz admitted his guilt and received his sentence, justice was served according to law. But justice in courtrooms represents only one dimension of society's response to tragedy. The deeper, more challenging justice involves preventing future Patricias from ever entering courtrooms as victims, ensuring that childhood's vulnerabilities don't become predators' opportunities, and building digital environments where connection doesn't require risking annihilation. That work continues. It will always continue. And as it does, Patricia Jocelyn Alator, Bakersfield's daughter, Clara's baby, Viviana's sister, a 13-year-old girl who loved cars and art and light, remains both warning and inspiration. Her brief existence and brutal death pose an enduring challenge. Will we protect children as fiercely as predators pursue them? The answer, written daily through action and inaction, determines whether Patricia's legacy is tragedy alone or tragedy transformed into purpose.